Thank you. Mr. Turner.
Thank you. Dr. Kinder-Taylor, Dr. Tang, thank you for being here. Secretary General Rasmussen, Secretary Albright, thank you for being here, and thank you for your continued efforts to serve. Our country and our world is safer because both of you in your great service have continued your efforts to help build democracy. Secretary Albright, we were having a conversation just post-Munich Security Conference where our allies are now suffering internal domestic problems. As we look to U.S. leadership and authoritarian regimes, we have France burning with yellow vests. We have Germany's, Merkel's government's unstable. We have England preoccupied with Brexit. Recognizing that we're not the Foreign Affairs Committee, as Nunes said, I want to turn to a question about Russia and give both of you, Secretary General Rasmussen and Secretary Albright, a intel question. It's just recent that we all now agree that Russia is an adversary. And we all recall that when Obama openly mocked his opponent in 2012 for saying Russia was an adversary, and that was so now 1990s, that has changed. We are now all in agreement. In 2014, Russia invaded Ukraine and annexed Crimea. In 2015, Russia went into Syria. In 2017, there was an attempted assassination in Montenegro as they were ascending into NATO. We have the chemical weapons attack that occurred in the Ukraine, and all that in the context of the invasion of Georgia under President Bush. And you look on the nuclear side, you have Russia openly in their Sabbat exercises using a nuclear weapon component. You have Putin saying he's ready for another Cuban missile crisis. We have the modernization of the nuclear weapons. We have their nuclear doctrine, where they said they'll use nuclear weapons to de-escalate, and we have their hybrid warfare in all of our countries. The Trump administration's done a lot, expanding the F-35. Belgium's just joined us. They've armed Ukraine after Poroshenko came in front of a joint session of Congress and said, I can't fight a war with blankets. We're now doing NATO training. NATO has increased funding. Stoltenberg just said that since 2016, European allies and Canada have spent a cumulative $40 billion more on defense. And based on the latest reports, this will rise to $100 billion by next year, doubling as a result of the Trump administration's prodding. The Trump administration doubled the European Reassurance Initiative. We have troops in Poland, Marines in Norway. We still have the Obama administration sanctions that remain in place, and some that have been increased by Trump. What I'm concerned about is information sharing, since this is the Intel Committee. As you know, Secretary Albright, there was significant angst among Congress that we were not sharing INF treaty violations from Russia closely enough with our allies. Many times when we're aware of what they're doing, we don't give them the information that they need. The RAND study was one of the first public statements of showing what Russia capability was within the area. So I'd like both of you to talk for a moment about the gap. Isn't it dangerous? Don't we have an obligation to share with our allies the intel that shows what Russia's capability is? I'll start with you, Secretary General.
Yes, indeed. We should do that. And I can testify to the fact that the Russian violations of the INF Treaty were only reluctantly shared with NATO allies. But it's clear, and it was clear to many of us, that Russia violated the INF Treaty. In that respect, I think the US has done the right thing to indicate the willingness to withdraw from the INF Treaty, hoping that would lead to new negotiations on a more robust and updated and more robust treaty. Actually, within NATO, we have improved intel sharing during recent years. A special unit has been developed within NATO, but still some allies are more reluctant to share intelligence with others. I would very much like to see a more intensified sharing of intelligence within NATO. That's one of the ways to strengthen NATO.
Secretary Albright.
I do believe that it's very important to begin to treat our allies as allies. There are any number of ways that we can and should cooperate, and I definitely think on the intelligence sharing, but it requires a certain amount of trust. And that has kind of dissipated. That worries me a lot in terms of how we operate with our allies. I also think that we underestimated where Russia was going. I think we thought the Cold War is over. We thought we'd won it. And when I was talking about this survey that we took, we also did focus groups in '91, and I'll never forget this man in a focus group outside of Moscow who stood up and said, "I'm so embarrassed. We used to be a superpower, and now we're Bangladesh with missiles." Putin has identified, again, the way Orban has with anger, to make himself great again, and I think that we have forgotten that we're dealing with a KGB agent. And he knows how to do this, and he is undermining what we're doing. I think he has played a weak hand very well. And I personally owe an apology to Senator Romney, because I think that we underestimated what was going on in Russia. And I was on the CIA External Advisory Board. There was no question that less money was being put into Russian language and assessing what was going on in Russia. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And the thing also, there is an awful lot of open source information now, which also has to be handled by the intelligence community. And I hope that you all kind of push on that. But we underestimated Russia, and they are, Putin has put them back on the scene.
One thing I'll just quickly add is I think we just live in a world where the burden of truth is incredibly high, and that's something that the Russians take advantage of. And so where it's possible for the intelligence community to lean forward and share intelligence, I think that helps a great deal.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, if I could for just a moment, could I recognize Sandy Virch-Bow, who was the Deputy Secretary General of NATO and also served in the State Department. I think is one of the most brilliant experts and certainly works on a bipartisan basis. We certainly are glad to have him today. Thank you.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Turner.